She was buried beautiful, but returned as a vampiress hungry for souls. In the quiet village near the castle, whispers floated through the streets like smoke, carrying tales of Lady Seraphine's beauty and the tragedy that had befallen her. She had been the jewel of the kingdom, with hair like spun silver and eyes that held the calm of twilight. Now she lay in the grand tomb, her body still and pale, yet so perfectly preserved that many said it seemed she only slept. The day of her burial had been a spectacle of sorrow and awe. The people had lined the streets in hushed silence, their heads bowed beneath the dark banners of mourning. Seraphine's coffin, carved from the finest black oak, gleamed under the lantern light. Flowers of midnight blue and blood-red surrounded it, their scent mingling with the damp air. Every noble of the court had attended, their faces masks of grief or calculation, hiding the stirrings of ambition behind polite bows. Duke Cale stood near the head of the procession, his posture flawless, yet a tightness in his jaw betrayed the storm within. He had loved Seraphine, or at least, the idea of her. Yet some part of him had envied the light she carried, the way she could calm storms with a simple word. Now, that light was gone, and all that remained was the cold shadow of her absence. Among the mourners, a lone figure lingered apart from the crowd. Elias, a scholar of forbidden knowledge and a healer of whispered repute, watched the funeral with quiet intensity. His dark eyes traced the carved inscriptions on the coffin and the delicate folds of Seraphine's gown. He had known her in secret, sharing stolen moments in the castle gardens and dusty libraries. There had always been an understanding between them, something unspoken that neither dared name. As the coffin was lowered into the tomb beneath the castle, the air grew thick. A chill swept through the crowd, and even the torches flickered as though frightened. The villagers muttered of ill omens, their voices trembling. No one could see the subtle stirring within the tomb itself, the faintest flutter of movement beneath the silk-lined coffin. Night settled over the kingdom like a velvet shroud. The castle was silent, save for the echo of distant footsteps and the sigh of wind through the broken towers. Deep within the crypt, Seraphine's eyes opened. They were no longer the soft gray of twilight but glowed faintly crimson, luminous in the darkness. Her chest rose and fell, not with the rhythm of life but with a new hunger that pulsed through her veins, ancient and unyielding. She rose from the coffin with grace, her body untouched by decay, her hair flowing like shadowed silver. The tomb walls seemed to bend around her, shadows curling and twisting as though acknowledging her return. Yet in her eyes lingered a spark of the Seraphine she had been, the girl who had laughed beneath sunlit gardens, who had spoken words of kindness even to strangers. Outside, Elias remained near the entrance to the crypt, studying the sigils etched into the stone. He sensed the unnatural stirring, a pull in the air that pricked the skin and whispered of life beyond death. He stepped closer, hands trembling, knowing somehow that Seraphine was near. And he was right. Seraphine stepped into the moonlight that spilled through a cracked tower window. Her lips parted, tasting the night, the wind, the scent of life that had been denied to her for so long. Hunger tugged at her, a dark whisper urging her toward the living. But her mind recoiled from the thought of harming the innocent. She had not been born for cruelty. She had been stolen from life too soon, and now she walked in the thin line between shadow and soul. Elias called her name softly, and she froze. His voice was the thread that tied her back to herself. She had not expected him here, not yet, not so soon. The longing that had haunted her dreams, the ache of being unseen and unheard, surged like a tide. Yet the hunger within her fought for control, a wild, merciless force she did not understand. "You're here," she whispered, her voice a silken echo, neither fully human nor entirely other. Elias stepped into the moonlight, his face pale, illuminated by the silver haze. His eyes widened as he took in her form, alive, yet changed, radiant yet terrifying. "Seraphine!" His voice trembled, unsure if he spoke to a dream or a nightmare. "It's really you," she hesitated, longing to reach for him, to explain what had happened, what she had become. But how could she tell him that the warmth he offered might now bring danger? How could she confess the hunger that clawed at her from within? I am not the same," she said finally, her eyes lowering. "I cannot be." Elias moved closer, his hands outstretched, willing to risk anything to bridge the distance between them. "You are still Seraphine. You are still you." His voice held hope, and something fragile began to bloom in her heart. Yet beyond the castle walls, Duke Kale watched from the shadows. He had not yet learned that Seraphine had returned, but he felt a shift, a change in the currents of power. His ambition, his obsession with immortality, would not allow him to wait idly. Somewhere in the night, he would seek her, and when he did, the delicate balance between hunger and heart would be tested. Seraphine turned from Elias, glancing toward the distant horizon where the first stars shimmered like frozen tears. She could feel the pulse of the living world calling to her, the whispers of souls she could hear, and the temptation of power coursing through her new form. She was both predator and prisoner, beauty and shadow entwined in one being. Elias followed her gaze, understanding the danger but unwilling to let her stand alone. "You don't have to face this alone," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a promise. "Whatever you are now, I will not abandon you." A breeze stirred the towers, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and midnight blossoms. Seraphine's lips curved into a faint, melancholy smile. It had been so long since anyone had offered her a choice, since anyone had seen her as more than an object of grief or a symbol of beauty. Now, someone had chosen her despite the darkness she carried. The moon climbed higher, and shadows stretched long across the courtyard. Seraphine moved silently, gliding over the stone floors as though she were part of the night itself. Yet she kept her distance from Elias, testing her own restraint, learning the limits of the hunger that roared within her. In the distance, a wolf howled, a mournful cry that echoed across the misty hills. It was a sound of both warning and welcome, and Seraphine felt it resonate deep within her. She was no longer fully human, yet she had not lost her soul entirely. There was still time, perhaps, to reclaim the light buried beneath the shadows. Elias watched her, a mixture of fear and hope twisting inside him. He had studied curses and prophecies, magic and mortality, but nothing had prepared him for this, an impossible reunion with someone he loved, now touched by forces that should not exist. And yet, he could not turn away. For a long moment, they simply looked at one another, separated by air and instinct, by hunger and hope. The world outside the castle slept, unaware of the life that had returned, and the shadowed fate that awaited both Seraphine and the kingdom she had once called home. Finally she spoke again, her voice a whisper carried on the wind. "Do not follow me too closely, Elias. There are dangers you cannot imagine, and I am part of them now." He nodded, understanding the warning yet refusing to retreat. "Then I will wait, I will watch. And when you are ready, I will be here." A sudden chill swept through the courtyard, stronger than the night wind. Seraphine's eyes flicked to the darkness beyond, where something moved, silent, watchful, patient. She did not need to see the face to know its intent. The world had changed, and forces older than any living soul were stirring. With a final, lingering look at Elias, she stepped into the deeper shadows of the castle, vanishing from sight as easily as a dream slipping from memory. He remained, heart pounding, knowing that the woman he loved had returned, but not entirely as she had been. She was a creature of beauty and hunger, of longing and darkness, and the night had only just begun. And somewhere far above, the first star of night shimmered, a silent witness to a love that would be tested by darkness, cursed hands, and the pull of a hunger she could not yet fully control. Cliffhanger, beneath the silent vaults of the castle, Seraphine paused before a carved door, sensing that something, or someone, was watching her. A shiver ran through her, not of cold but of warning. The game had begun, and she was both hunter and prey. The castle had grown colder since Seraphine's return. Shadows clung to the walls like dark ivy, curling around every stone and archway. The servants whispered among themselves of a presence that moved without sound, of a beauty that had once been lost but now prowled like a phantom through the halls. Yet no one saw her clearly. She moved as if part of the night itself, her crimson eyes gleaming faintly, reflecting both hunger and sorrow. Seraphine had tried to stay away from the living, to resist the urge that tugged at her from within. Hunger was a constant companion now, a dark river flowing through her veins, reminding her of the unnatural life she had been granted. Each step into the halls of the castle brought her close to temptation, the warmth of the humans she once knew, the pulse of life she could no longer fully join. Yet she refused to give in to the shadows completely. She was not yet lost, and somewhere deep inside, the Seraphine of the garden and sunlit libraries still survived. Elia's remained a constant thought, a fragile tether to the life she had been torn from. He had stayed near, often unseen, watching her from a distance. He left flowers and small tokens of remembrance in places he knew she might visit. A silver locket on a balcony, a single white rose by the fountain, a note written in careful script. I see you. I wait. Each gesture drew her heart closer to warmth and away from the cold hunger gnawing within. One evening, Seraphine stood in the moonlit garden, hidden beneath the arches of climbing roses. Her hands brushed over the petals, soft and fragrant, yet her touch was careful, almost reverent. She could feel the pulse of the flowers, the gentle energy of the living world, and it made her ache. The thought of taking life for sustenance filled her with dread, yet the hunger was patient, whispering that she was made for this new dark world. Elia stepped softly onto the garden path, not daring to speak too loudly. "Seraphine," he said gently, "I will not leave you alone." "I cannot." She turned toward him, the faintest hesitation in her movement. "Elias, I am no longer the one you knew," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I walk in shadow now. I hunger for things I do not understand. I cannot promise anything." Elias took another step closer, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "Then let me understand with you," he said. "Let me help you remember what it is to be human, to be you." For a moment her eyes softened. She remembered the way he had once laughed at her clumsy attempts at reading spells, the quiet kindness that had never demanded anything in return, the way he had looked at her as if her heart mattered more than her beauty. And yet that same tenderness was threatened by the darkness curling inside her. Before either could speak further, a distant shout echoed from the castle gates. Seraphine's gaze snapped toward the sound. Shadows moved along the walls, figures that did not belong to the servants, cloaked and purposeful. She recognized the ambition in their movements, Duke Kale's men. They hunted for her, unaware that she had returned, and their intentions were far from gentle. Elias noticed her sudden tension. "Kale," he whispered. "He has begun his hunt. You must be careful." Seraphine's lips pressed into a thin line. She had once cared for Kale, though now it was clear that his love had been tainted by obsession and power. He would never see her as human, only as an instrument, a means to his desire for control and immortality. "I cannot run forever," she said softly. "The more I hide, the more danger follows." The night stretched on, and Seraphine led Elias through secret passages beneath the castle, passages she had explored as a girl but now seemed transformed by shadow. They moved silently, every step deliberate, every corner potentially dangerous. It was in these quiet moments, walking together beneath the stones of their ancestors, that the bond between them deepened. Elias spoke softly, telling stories of the living world, of memories they had shared, of laughter and sunlight. Seraphine listened, letting herself feel once again, letting herself remember the warmth she had lost. But the hunger remained, a silent, insistent companion. In the grand hall, where the banners of the kingdom hung heavy and dust motes floated in the candlelight, she caught the scent of life. Servants moving about, hearts beating, breath warm in the chill air. Her hands clenched at her sides, resisting the pull of instinct. She could feel the thrill of power coursing through her new veins, and it frightened her. Elias noticed her struggle. "Do not give in," he urged, his hand brushing hers. "You are stronger than that. You are still Seraphine, you still choose." Her eyes met his, crimson meeting gray, and something unspoken passed between them. She did not hunger for him, yet the desire to protect him, to be near him, was almost as intense as the darkness inside her. She realized then that her true test was not simply survival, it was love. Could she allow herself to care for someone when she could not fully be among the living? Could she fight the darkness for a heart that still beat in the sun? Suddenly, a window shattered, sending shards of glass scattering across the floor. Duke Kale had entered the hall, his presence commanding, dangerous. His gaze swept over the room until it landed on Seraphine, and a cruel smile touched his lips. "So the beauty buried returns," he said, his voice smooth yet filled with menace. "I wondered if the stories were true." Seraphine's breath caught, her body tensing. She had expected him eventually, but the reality of his presence made her pulse quicken, not with warmth, but with the primal edge of instinct. She stepped forward, the shadows of her new form stretching across the floor. "Kale," she said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart, "you will leave or there will be consequences you do not understand." Kale's smile widened. "Ah, consequences are my specialty. I deal in power, Seraphine. You think yourself changed, but you are still mine to command or to destroy." Elias moved to her side instinctively, his hand brushing hers. "Do not listen to him," he said quietly. "You are not his to command, you are your own." Seraphine's eyes flickered to him, drawing strength from his words. She realized that this confrontation was inevitable. The hunger within her, the darkness, the very nature of what she had become, would all be tested tonight. And yet, for the first time since rising from her tomb, she felt the courage to stand. Not as a victim, not as a shadow, but as herself, even if she was now something more than human. Kale lunged forward, but Seraphine moved with impossible speed, gliding across the floor, her form almost a blur in the candlelight. She did not attack him, only positioned herself between him and Elias, letting her presence alone convey the danger he now faced. Kale froze, realization dawning that she was no longer the Seraphine he had known, and that his ambitions might cost him more than he was willing to lose. The tension was a taut string stretched between past and present, light and shadow, life and death. Kale retreated, unwilling to test the limits of her new power, but the message was clear. The hunt had begun, and the kingdom itself would tremble under the storm that her return had awakened. After he left, Seraphine and Elias remained in silence for a long while. The hall was quiet again, the only sound the soft wind whispering through broken windows. She turned to him, eyes still glowing faintly with crimson light. "Elias," she said softly, "if I am to remain in this world, I must learn control. I must learn to master what I have become, or I will lose myself completely." He nodded, taking her hand gently. "And I will help you," he said. "We will find a way together." A faint, sad smile curved her lips. She had expected the world to reject her, to fear her, to cast her into darkness alone. Yet here was someone who believed in her still, who offered hope even in the night. It was a fragile hope, perhaps, but it was enough. The moon climbed higher, spilling silver light into the hall, illuminating Seraphine's pale skin and glimmering hair. For the first time since her resurrection, she allowed herself a moment of peace, a moment where the hunger was not all-consuming, where fear was tempered by trust. Yet beyond the castle walls, dangers stirred. Kale would not give up easily. The whispers of the court carried tales of unnatural shadows, of beauty returned from death, and ambition would never rest. Forces older than Seraphine herself began to take notice, sensing the balance of life and darkness shifting in ways that threatened the kingdom. Seraphine glanced at Elias once more, her heart heavy but determined. "Whatever comes," she whispered, "I will not lose myself to the night. Not yet. Not while there is still light to fight for." Elias pressed his hand to hers, holding her close without breaking the fragile distance. "Then we face it together," he said. "Whatever the night brings, we face it as one." Outside, the wind rose, carrying with it the scent of rain and the whisper of the forest beyond the castle. Somewhere in the shadows, eyes watched, calculating and patient. The night was far from over, and the hunger that lived within Seraphine was only beginning to test her limits. Cliffhanger. In the distance, a low, mournful howl echoed across the kingdom. Seraphine's eyes widened. She had sensed it before, a presence older than the castle itself. The hunger, the shadows, the court's ambition, none of it compared to what was coming. And she realized with a shiver that the true test of her strength and humanity had only just begun. The castle lay under a heavy mist, the air thick with anticipation and unease. Seraphine moved silently through the grand hall, her crimson eyes scanning every shadow, every flicker of candlelight. The hunger inside her throbbed like a drumbeat, a constant reminder that she was no longer fully human. But tonight, she would not flee or hide. Tonight, she would confront the storm that had begun the moment she rose from her tomb. Elias waited at the heart of the hall, near the ancient stone fountain. His hand rested lightly on the carved edge, and he met her gaze as she appeared in the doorway, like a vision drawn from both nightmare and memory. "I am ready," he said softly. "Whatever comes, we face it together." She stepped closer, feeling the warmth of his presence, a light that pierced the darkness of her new existence. She wanted to reach for him, to hold him, but instinct warned her to maintain distance. The hunger inside whispered that even a touch could be dangerous. Yet Elias had been her anchor, the tether to the Seraphine she had been, and she would not abandon him. The doors at the far end of the hall creaked open, and Duke Kale entered, flanked by two armored guards. His eyes glittered with ambition, cruelty, and a twisted fascination. "So the shadow of my lost bride finally decides to appear," he said, his voice smooth, like oil poured over stone. "Do you not miss the warmth of life, Seraphine? Or has eternity made you careless of mortal ties?" Seraphine's lips pressed into a thin line. She did not answer immediately, letting the silence stretch, heavy and deliberate. Then her voice, calm and resolute, broke through. "I am not yours to command, Kale. I am no one's. I have returned, but I am not the same as the one you desired. I am my own." Kale's eyes narrowed, and he took a slow step forward. "You think yourself strong," he said, "but the hunger you deny will rule you. It always does. Give yourself to it, and perhaps we can find immortality together." She shook her head, crimson light glimmering faintly in her eyes. "I do not seek power. I seek balance. I seek to reclaim what I can, even if it is only my own soul." Elias stepped forward, placing himself slightly between her and Kale. "She is not alone," he said, his voice firm, "and you will not dictate what she becomes." The confrontation was tense, a web of unspoken threats, desire, and determination. Kale lunged forward, intending to seize Seraphine, but she moved with the fluid grace of shadow, avoiding him with a speed and precision that left him staggering. Her form flickered in the candlelight, almost unreal. She was neither fully human nor fully other, yet every movement spoke of mastery over her new existence. Kale's guards raised their weapons, but Seraphine's voice, sharp and commanding, stopped them. "Step back," she said. And in that instant, the shadows in the hall seemed to bend to her will, curling around the intruders like living smoke. The guards stumbled, unease written across their faces, and Kale realized that brute force would not win this night. Elias moved closer, whispering encouragement. "Remember who you are," he said. "Not just what you've become. Your heart, your choices, they matter." She nodded slightly, feeling the truth of his words. The hunger was strong, yes, but it was not all-consuming. She was more than it. She was Seraphine, the girl who had walked through sunlit gardens, who had loved, laughed, and dreamed. And now she could fight, not only for herself but for the world that still held light among the shadows. Kale, sensing his advantage slipping, attempted a final, desperate strike. Seraphine moved, and with the speed of the night she disarmed him, sending his sword clattering across the stone floor. She did not harm him further. Instead, she stepped close, her voice low and steady. "Leave, Kale, leave this place, this obsession. You will not control me." For a long, tense moment, Kale's eyes locked with hers. His ambition, his desire, his need to dominate, they all warred against his fear. Finally, he straightened, realizing the futility of his pursuit. "This is not over," he said, though his tone lacked conviction, and he retreated, shadows swallowing him as he fled. Silence returned to the hall. The castle itself seemed to exhale, the weight of centuries of expectation and fear lifting slightly. Seraphine lowered herself to the edge of the fountain, her hands brushing the water, feeling its coolness seep into her. Elias knelt beside her, gently taking her hand in his. "You were incredible," he whispered. "You faced him, and you didn't lose yourself." She looked at him, crimson fading to a softer glow, and allowed a faint, bittersweet smile. "I have not yet won," she said. "There are still shadows to face, still hunger to resist, but with you perhaps there is hope." Elias' eyes held hers unwavering. "We will face it together. Whatever comes, we face it as one." The night stretched on, quiet now, filled with a fragile peace. Seraphine and Elias walked through the gardens, the moonlight spilling over their path. She moved more freely now, testing the limits of her control, feeling the pull of life and light once again. With every step, she reclaimed a piece of herself, the courage, the compassion, the strength she had once thought lost forever. Yet even in this calm, a deeper awareness stirred. The forest beyond the castle, the hills and valleys stretching into the darkness, held ancient forces that had noticed her return. Spirits older than the kingdom, guardians and watchers of forgotten magic, began to stir. They would test her resolve, her heart, her very essence. And she knew that when the time came, she would have to face them, not as a frightened girl, but as the woman she had become. Elias watched her closely, sensing her thoughts, her fears, her determination. "Whatever comes," he said softly, "we will meet it together." Seraphine nodded, feeling the truth in his words. Love had not vanished with death, it had endured, waiting patiently in the shadows. And now it was a light she could carry into the night, a beacon against the hunger, the fear, the ambition that threatened her. They returned to the castle hall, where the first light of dawn began to break through the high windows. It was pale and hesitant, a promise rather than a certainty. Seraphine stepped forward, feeling the warmth on her skin for the first time since her resurrection. She realized that she could not return fully to the living, could not fully join the day, yet the light touched her in a way that reminded her of what she fought for. Elias remained at her side, hand in hand, silent and steadfast. They were bound not by magic or fear, but by choice, by courage, by love. And in that moment she understood that no matter how deep the darkness, there was always a part of her that could shine. The castle stirred with life around them. Servants began their morning routines, unaware of the shadowed drama that had unfolded the night before. Seraphine observed quietly, knowing she would continue to move among the living and the shadows, learning, controlling, protecting. She had been given a second chance, not to reclaim her old life, but to forge a new one stronger, wiser, and tempered by both light and darkness. Elias looked at her, eyes filled with unspoken promise. "The world may fear you," he said, "but I will not. I will stand with you always." Seraphine's smile was faint but filled with warmth. "Then we have already won," she whispered. "Together." Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain and earth, of life and renewal. Somewhere in the distant hills, the ancient spirits watched, curious but patient. The night had tested her, but Seraphine had not broken. She had faced hunger, fear, and ambition, and she had emerged not just as a creature of shadow, but as a guardian of her own destiny. And in the quiet, lingering moment before the full light of dawn, Seraphine allowed herself to hope for life, for love, for the promise of a future that belonged to her and her heart alone. The world would remember the night she returned, not only for the terror of her hunger, but for the courage, the strength, and the love that had guided her through the darkness. The crimson glow in her eyes faded as she stepped toward the rising sun, the night behind her and a new path ahead. Elias walked beside her, their hands entwined, a bond stronger than fear or darkness. The castle, the kingdom, the night itself, all had borne witness to her return. And now Seraphine would shape her own destiny, a legend of shadow and light, hunger and heart, forever intertwined. Cliffhanger ending. High above the castle, a raven circled, its eyes glinting with intelligence. It landed atop the highest tower, a silent herald of secrets yet to come. Though Seraphine had reclaimed her heart and soul, the world remained vast and mysterious, and the balance of life and darkness would continue to challenge her. But she was ready. She had survived the night, and in doing so had found the strength to live, love, and rise again.